We will now resume proceedings in Finance Committee. Please be seated. Mr. Pannon, before we took the luncheon break, you were intending to move a motion concerning disbursements from the EPF. You may proceed to do so, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I think effectively I had proposed a motion to reopen FSC 13 at that point. So what I think after further discussion and to avoid any concern, what I would do is withdraw that motion and proceed with the motion in respect of the authorizing monies out of the Environmental Protection Fund. And for the record, Mr. Chair, I will read the full resolution, which is as follows. Whereas the Environmental Protection Fund was created on December 23rd, 1997 by government motion number 14 of 97 for the purpose of defraying expenditure incurred in protecting and preserving the environment of the islands. And whereas it is required that disbursements from the fund may only be made in accordance with resolutions made by the Finance Committee and under the authority of the Minister of Finance for the purpose of defraying expenditure incurred in protecting and preserving the environment of the islands. And whereas at 31st of May 2015, the balance of the fund was CI dollars 52 million. And whereas the government is seeking approval in the 2015-16 financial year for the amounts shown on the schedule attached to the resolution, which total CI 5,180,000, that represents expenditures to be incurred with respect to protecting and preserving the environment of the islands, being met by disbursements from the fund. Be it now therefore resolved that 1, the proposed expenditures shown on the attached schedule totaling 5,180,000 that are expected to be incurred in the period 1st of July 2015 to 30th June 2016 be recognized as being in interest of protecting and preserving the environment of the islands, and 2, that the Minister of Finance be authorized to disburse up to CI 5,180,000 from the Environmental Protection Fund to cover expenditures to be incurred with respect to the matters on the attached schedule. And Mr. Chair, in respect of the attached schedule, there is an amount in respect of the agency of the Ministry of District Administration, Tourism and Transport. There's an amount of 2,500,000, and there's a description and details being costs associated with environmental impact assessment for the cruise berthing facility. This is an element of appropriation EA 143, which is for a total amount of 4,200,000. Secondly, the agency listed, or second agency listed is the Ministry of Home Affairs, Health and Culture for 1 million. That's monies to be spent for the Integrated Solid Waste Management Project, and this is an element of appropriation EI 53, which is for a total amount of CI 2,200,000. The third agency is the Ministry of Financial Services, Commerce and Environment. There is an amount of 180,000, and in terms of the description, this is for a replacement of the Seakeeper vessel for marine patrols, and that is an element of appropriation EI 67, which is for a total of CI 675,000. Lastly, Mr. Chair, the final agency noted is the Ministry of Financial Services, Commerce and Environment, for an amount of 1,500,000. And in terms of the details, this is proposed to be added to the appropriation headed FSC 13, which is to cover elements of the existing matters described in FSC 13, as well as to enable further, one, conservation-related operational expenditure, and two, conservation-related projects and initiatives.
Thank you, Mr. Pannon. Mr. Pannon, I'm being advised by the clerk that for the sake of following the standing orders, that having moved the previous motion, that you withdraw that, the motion with respect to amendments at the committee stage, FSC 13, withdraw that
I did.
before we
I thought I had, sir.
discuss this. You have? You had? Okay,
When I initially spoke
Perfect.
to this,
thank you.
I
Thank you.
withdrew that. I think, Mr. Chair, before I continue, no, I think sorry.
Okay,
There's another matter that we have to address on the other resolution.
thank you. Mr. Pannon, having moved the motion, do you wish to speak to the motion, sir?
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. Mr. Chair, as has been described and is noted on the schedule to the motion, we have an amount of 2.5 million CI, which relates to the cost of the environmental impact assessment for the cruise berthing facilities. That is already an amount which is approved under EI 143, as noted previously. Clearly, that is relating to an issue involving environmental protection. We also have the $1 million for the Ministry of Home Affairs to be spent in relation to the Integrated Solid Waste Management Project. That is also already approved under EI 53. My understanding, and no doubt the Premier could speak to the specifics of that, my understanding is that that relates to environmental protection issues as well. Clearly, there are issues in relation to the landfill facility, which impinge very specifically and directly on environmental issues. So I think it's not hard to draw that connection. Certainly, in relation to the replacement of the vessel Seakeeper for the Department of Environment, this is quite significant for the department. It is their main work boat, and it is fairly old now, so it does need replacement. That is already approved under EI 67. So the first three matters, Mr. Chair, are elements that are already set out in the budget, and they comprise amounts which the government proposes to utilize from the Environmental Protection Fund to meet these specific expenses. The final one is an amount of $1,500,000 in respect of the Ministry of Financial Services, Commerce and Environment. As I said earlier, Mr. Chair, this will require, assuming we have authorization from this committee to spend this money, this will require a further resolution to add that money into a specific heading. We propose FSC 13 to enable to cover certain elements of FSC 13 as it is, and to enable additional conservation-related expenditure and conservation projects and initiatives. Mr. Chair, we don't have a definitive indication of those projects, but I can give you a few examples. One of which is we're seeking to apply that in respect of the National Trust Blue Iguana project, or Blue Iguana Recovery Project, which would be in a region of about $200,000. The Blue Iguana Recovery Project has been very successful, but it is running short on funding, and this will help to fund the BURP project at least for the coming year, so a further year. and it will also add some funding to the construction of a visitors center and shelter at the Colliers Wilderness Reserve. So it certainly will add to the protection and preservation of the blue iguana, and it will add to the tourism facilities as well, so where visitors can attend and see some of these iguanas in the wild. Another example, which I'm sure the members will be very supportive of, Mr. Chair, is a pilot project in order to deal with the green iguana scourge that we have going on in the country. I don't think I have to tell anybody the extent of the problem that we have in respect of the green iguanas. They are all over our roads as a roadkill these days. They're all over our yards. They're in our trees. They're in our pools. So they're quite a pest, quite a nuisance. And certainly we're looking to apply at least about 200,000 to a pilot project in order to ascertain how best to reduce their numbers, whether it's through culling or some other methodology. And very importantly, Mr. Chair, we want to ensure that we can utilize some of these funds to prevent the infestation of the sister islands with the green iguanas. We know that there are some in Little Cayman at the moment. I haven't heard of any specific reports of any being found in the Brac, but clearly this is something that we want to get on top of. We want to eradicate them from the sister islands because that's where we have the greatest chance of doing that. For us in Cayman, it's not likely we're going to be successful with eradication, but we will have to find appropriate methodologies through which we can best reduce the numbers and mitigate their effects, both on our environment and their impact on our ability, our quality of life, and our ability to enjoy our surroundings. Those are two significant areas, Mr. Chair, that that I would refer to, and there's one other one, just as an example, which is the completion of a total economic valuation of our marine resources for Cayman, for our country. We're looking to spend somewhere in the region of about 50 to 75,000 in respect to that. I think it's very important for us as a country to recognize, Mr. Chair, that we have very significant assets that ought to be a part of our aggregate balance sheet, and this will help us to recognize the true value of all of the assets that we have as a country, particularly given the fact that we don't have other natural resources. Our environment is our major asset. So those are examples, Mr. Chair. I don't have each of these things itemized specifically, but we're probably going to have at least half of the 1.5 dealing with conservation-related measures, additional conservation measures under the heading FSC 13, and some will also go towards these conservation-related projects and initiatives which I have described. So with that, Mr. Chair, certainly other members can contribute their respective views and input. But I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Minister Pannon. Does any other member wish to speak? Mr. Bush.
Mr. Chairman, I've listened to the minister and his request for getting funds from the Environmental Protection Fund. And I don't know if any one of them did mention that they would be in their budget contributions, whether they would be needing funds from this. I do remember, though, the beating I took when I suggested that we needed for some similar purposes and didn't get the support, and we had to go in a different direction. But having listened, there is some deeper matters to be addressed in these requests. The request to take $2.5 million, which amounts to a total of 4.2 for the environmental impact assessment for the cruise berthing facility. Wasn't going to say that it's not needed, although we had over the years many environmental impacts. Sometimes I wonder if we get things to tell us what we don't want to do, to agree with us. Mr. Chairman, on that particular aspect, perhaps they need to have a relook at the whole dock issue. We've gone around this in circles for umpteen years now, and we just can't seem to find agreement. We've had war between the North and South, and all kind of blockings and complaints and otherwise. But now, perhaps the government needs to have a relook, reconsider the plan that they came about with and published last week to remove the 15 acres of a reef that helps to protect the port and the town and impacts 15 other acres. They're saying it's going to be, don't know if it's going to be workable or disaster. Then to take that residual fill and dump it. These are disconcerting efforts after all the efforts that various governments or disconcerting information and which these companies have given us, and after all the work that has been done over the years by various governments, and every time you thought you got to a point, there is a new matter. This one is of serious consequences. We see the kind of waves in a regular nor'wester. Imagine what will happen when it is deepened to the extent that the removal would cause, if what I'm reading is correct. Because I don't have the plan. I listen to different news reports of it. Perhaps from a cursory look, and I'm saying this, and I'm not one to speak in trepidation, but I don't know what could be said. But perhaps an alternative is to one, and that this is not an alternative, this is a must, is to develop spots. Spots has to be developed. So that has to go ahead. We're not going to service our tourism properly without it, no matter what they say. If you want to keep cruise tourism, that has to be done, unless you're going into the North Sound or you're going into Red Bay. And nobody seems to want to take up that challenge. Two, this is a must too, and should be done, is to build the jetty at the farm, which will bring about the finalization of the plan for the Cayman Turtle Farm and alleviate the needed subsidy of millions of dollars. That has to happen as well. It should happen. And the three, have the providers of the tenders modernize their fleet. Those three aspects will greatly enhance our cruise tourism product. And we don't know whether that will, and I'm not going to sit here and say that that is the cure-all. I'm saying that these, I think, are measures that we could take and satisfy for a long time. Whether we will ever get to the point, whether we would be able to take the big cruise liners that we had hoped to take, then I don't know, Mr. Chairman. We would have to wait and see whether we would ever get to that point. Having been told now that all the while, in many years that we've been talking about it, that it's not going to affect the beach as we thought. And that's one of the things that my administration thought was right. It would not affect the beach by the way we were planning to build. But I still believe that piers could be put without the extensive dredging, particularly so that they're not going to build any upland development. Perhaps the piers could be put there to take the load and satisfy the cruise industry, because they really push for it. I know, because I've had that many discussions. As I said, Mr. Chairman, all the many years you talk and you plan and you hope to get things done. I don't usually talk with much trepidation, but I go at this one with it, knowing the feelings that exist about what was announced last week, and knowing what all of us as government desire and what we have tried to do over a number of years. In regards to, and I am concerned about that vote. The landfill is another one that I don't know that we had to spend that money on it, but if money is spent, then we got to find money to pay. That's what I know. And I'm not one to say that people shouldn't be paid if once government has given a contract. But I thought that this might have told us the same thing that we learned for so many years as well. At less money. So the jury is out on that one, as far as I'm concerned. On the $180,000 for the seakeeper vessel, I think this is money well spent. This is one of the things that we were trying to get some funds to enhance the fleet, but we didn't get support for it. But I know it needs to be done. And I'm wondering whether this is enough. I'm wondering whether that the question I have is that one vessel or is that a number of vessels? That's the one, but I know that there are needs, and maybe they will tell me that this will sufficiently do. If so, then they are the ones that are running the department, not me. On the 1.5 and the iguanas and everything else, a lot of money to cover them pests, but as the minister said, they're all about, and they are real pests. So I'm going to support any issue that I can to eradicate, if possible, however the culling is done. But we've got to try to do something, because they are the most destructive things that you ever find. Probably one of the major problems we got for anybody that does any kind of planting, at least in my yard. I don't know if the minister did report to us on all that he intends to do with this $1.5 million. Maybe he can't, but I am more or less in agreement with that.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Does any other member wish to speak? Mr. McLean?
Mr. Chairman, I was wondering what the other minister's explanation was for this. It has not been voted on. Mr. Chairman, has this thing been voted on? But, Mr. Chairman, if this thing has been voted on, then I don't know what we're doing here. Because but, Mr. Chairman, there is nothing in this budget document representing the removal of this monies. Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, sir, the minister who spoke, the Minister for Financial Services, who's moving this motion, went through in considerable detail the schedule just now. And I understood him very clearly to explain that the items in the schedule, the first three of them, have all been dealt with and approved by Finance. The expenditure has been approved by Finance Committee previously because they form part of the budget documents. What is being asked with respect to them now is that those respective appropriations, appropriation EA 43, appropriation EI 53, and appropriation EI 67, be supplemented with these proposed sums from the Environmental Protection Fund. So I do not believe it is necessary or appropriate for the Finance Committee to now re-examine what it is already examined with respect to the expenditure. The issue here is whether or not Finance Committee will approve the funding, part of the funding for these appropriations to come from the EPF. If Finance Committee does not so approve, then obviously the expenditure, the full expenditure for those heads will not be able to be made. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Mr. Premier.
But, Mr. Chairman, the government did not come here with that proposal. The government came here and said that they were spending $4.2 million on EA1 for I-43. Mr. Chairman, there was no indication that that money was not coming from revenues. There was no indication of that, sir. They were spending 2.2 on the dump under the waste management project. There was no indication from your good self that that money was not available to the government through the general revenues. The replacement of the Seakeeper vessel, there was under EI 67, there was no indication from your good self when you put that vote, sir, or put it out for debate, that there was insufficient monies to meet that appropriation. Mr. Chairman, on FSC13, there was no indication from your good self, sir, nor the minister who defended it, or any of these, that there was not sufficient monies to meet those appropriations. I don't know how the Premier can now say that they have already been appropriated, as if to say that we are wasting our time here because on this motion, because, Mr. Chairman, I would respectfully draw the Premier's attention.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just clear up something. The member said, which is why I even bothered to enter this, the member said he wants an explanation from the ministers, including myself, as to what the money is to be spent on. All I am saying is what the money is to be spent on has been ventilated fully in Finance Committee. The issue now is about where the funding comes from. That's all I'm saying.
But, Mr. Chairman, I hear the Premier, but the Premier must respect that when the Finance Committee is appropriating and debating thereon and voting thereon, it is from general revenue unless otherwise says, indicated. It is now that we are getting this that it's otherwise indicating that it's not general revenue. That is my argument. Now, well, the argument is when projects, well, the objection is, Mr. Chairman, under the FFR, number 15 under the FFR, it says, for projects with a lifetime value above $10 million, and for those where the use of public-private partnership, PPPs, or any other form or alternative financing is being considered, the Cayman Island will also obtain independent accounting, legal, financial, economic, environmental, and other technical advice as appropriate to ensure robust investment appraisals are produced. Now, it is relevant because, Mr. Chairman, the doc has had to get a business case. And where that money is going to come from should have been presented a long time ago to England to get it approved to move ahead. Now, I want to know why.
Mr. Chairman, I think all of that is entirely irrelevant, but just so everyone is aware, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office is fully aware and has approved what we are seeking to do with respect to the EPF. We had to explain all of that to them, and we had to get the governors and their approval. So there's no hidden agenda or nothing is being kept from anybody here. The appropriate place for the approval, because that's what the rules say, is Finance Committee. And that's why it's here.
Mr. Chairman, I think the member from East End is rather right, though, that Finance Committee voted on allocations that there was not sufficient funds available in the budget, and we were not told that either in the budget speeches or in Finance Committee when they were examined. And I think that that's what the complaint is, which I certainly didn't know. I made my points clear, but I certainly didn't know, and we ought to have known what was the position at that time. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. McLean.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, it is my view. Mr. Chairman, I have documented evidence that correspondence between the Minister of the Environment and myself, where I gave him my unreserved commitment to support moving monies from the environmental fund to move towards enforcement. Unconditional, sir. I didn't attach any conditions to it. However, I think it's because of the purpose of the environmental fund, I think it's a stretch to ask this country to, this Finance Committee first, and this country to approve monies from that environmental fund to support the EIA on a dock. I think it's stretching it. I find it, but Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McLean, wouldn't you agree that if the monies does not come from the Environmental Protection Fund, that would otherwise then come from operating revenue?
Absolutely, but Mr. Chairman, I am saying that we have already approved it coming from the operating revenue. Why is it now in the midnight hour? Well, not what I suggest we do, Mr. Chairman. It's what the government proposed, and now the government in the 12th hour is coming here to do this.
Mr. Chairman, there is no 12th hour. have been involved from the start as the Minister of Finance, you know full well that this was always part of the government's strategy in planning its budget. Now, the member from East End and the member from Northside spent more than an hour this morning hammering the government over finding the money necessary to build classrooms at East End Primary. The reality is that if government is not able to use funds from the Environmental Protection Fund for the express purpose which has been contemplated in the original resolution from 1997, the 10th of December 1997, of protecting and preserving the environment of the Cayman Islands with respect to the sums contemplated here, $5.18 million. The government is going to have to look elsewhere to fund not only what we are proposing here, but things that the member from East End and the member from Northside want with respect to their districts. Now, the member from East End has to make up his mind whether or not he wants to support the government budget so that we are able to accommodate his and his colleague from Northside's many demands and requirements for their respective districts, or whether he wants to play politics with this thing and hammer the government over some imagined procedural error or defect in the way we're going about this. Nothing is wrong with this process. It is a process that was thought out and contemplated. He and every member of this finance committee have had the opportunity, and Lord knows you have been more than patient, Mr. Chairman, in allowing them to ask every question they could possibly think of, for us to provide every answer that we possibly could to those questions. The only issue before this committee now is whether or not we are going to agree to take the $5.18 million out of the EPF, or we are not. If we are not going to do that, the government will have to revisit its priorities and find out how we are going to fund the various other things, because we will then be $5.18 million short. That is the reality.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr.
Now,
McLean,
Mr. Chair.
if I may just contribute one thing to the discourse. The Environmental Protection Fund, Mr. McLean, it is there as a fund. The balance in the fund does not count towards our reserve ratios with respect to the framework for fiscal responsibility. If we don't utilize the funds in the Environmental Protection Fund to address these environmental matters with which we propose to spend the money, then the money must come from elsewhere. And you've already seen where we are trying to juggle apples in order to pay for the needs of the country. So it's a question, do you take it from recurrent revenue as it comes in and other things suffer, or do you utilize the existing Environmental Protection Fund to address the environmental protection issues that are growing? So it's
Mr. Chairman, I didn't come in this parliament yesterday. I've been here long enough to know when politics is being played. Okay? I want everybody to know that. So the Premier can't come with that about playing politics and about East End. He don't do anything for up there anyhow. The little bit he does, we got to fight for every minute of the day. Now, because these minor issues needs to be addressed for the constituents of East End, we are saying that distribution is there's some inequity in the distribution. That's all we have always been saying. Mr. Chairman, I pay close attention to your budget address. I read it over prior to coming to Finance Committee, and not one place in there the Environmental Fund was mentioned. You talked about revenues. And I draw your attention, sir, to page 12, where you started with, you, and sir, don't think I didn't read it. You see the red marks in it? And there is nothing in here. I am saying that this government is now saying that that's where they intended taking it from. There was no such thing. It was based on the revenues of this country. It was nothing out of the environmental fund to balance either one of those projects.
But Mr. McLean, if we have explained this to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, that has been the body imposing the restrictions on the government, and they have accepted that it is allowable for us to utilize the funds in the Environmental Protection Fund for the purpose of expenditure on the environment, and in keeping with the purpose for which the fund was set up. And if I read here, and whereas, be it now resolved, and this is the fund, this is the motion that established the fund in 1997. Be it resolved, and I'll go straight to number 4, that be it resolved that disbursements from the fund may only be made in accordance with the resolutions made by the Finance Committee and under the authority of the Financial Secretary to the purpose of defraying expenditure incurred in protecting and preserving the environment of the islands. So, Mr. McLean, whether we use recurrent revenue or we take from a fund where revenue has been diverted to as a result of the motion that I just read or just mentioned, either way, the money is still being spent for the purpose of the environment. I would see if we were using it to do something else. But all of the descriptions and points made there relate to expenditure on environmental issues.
So, Mr. Chairman, if such is the case, sir, can this committee, the Minister for Tourism, tell us if that 2.5 is going to be to correct the environmental damage that dredging out there is going to have then? That's the question.
Mr.
That's the only question can be.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If that was the only question, you should have asked it 30 minutes ago, and I've been happy to answer it for you.
You should have said what it was for before I had to ask the question. Is you proposing to remove it?
I think it's clearly outlined it as for the environmental assessment. If you want me to go through and explain where we are in the process, I'm happy to do that.
But, Mr. Chairman, that's precisely why I'm saying it's stretching it to consider it protecting the environment when the proposal, the EIA just came back and said they got to destroy some of the environment out there. It is stretching it to the limit. Chairman, on the matter of the minister who proposed this, and I gave that minister my commitment, and I will not go back on anything I tell you, anything to do with enforcement. You say them all iguanas, you call them, I'll even help you with that. You haven't explained the other 50% of it. I don't know what that's for. I would love to see $1 million, $750,000 million. I don't know what's going to take to increase the enforcement of the environmental matters and a recurrent removal of the money from here. I don't want to see no one time. I want to see us come Finance Committee or the House and resolve to move the amount to increase it by 5, 6, 8, 10. I don't know. And that's a constant, expenditure. expenditure. I don't have a problem with that. I'll support it. But don't tell me we're going to pay for EIA that is proposing to destroy the environment, and we can say that's protecting the environment. That's stretching it.
And Mr. Clinton,
Mr. Chairman,
in
you can put the
fairness-
vote, sir. I'm voting against it.
in fairness, the EIA isn't proposing to destroy the environment. The EIA is highlighting any potential environmental issues that may arise from the proposed project. And
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your correction. But certainly, the EIA that is partial or finish or draft or finish has indicated that some of the marine environment will be damaged.
right.
And we are paying for it out of the Environmental Protection Fund.
The service has been provided, so now you have to pay for the service. The service was to assess and provide a report. The report has been provided, so now you have to pay for the service.
Mr. Chairman, I understand that, sir. However, I believe, in my view, that protection of the environment would say if we're going to pay out of this fund, then we're not going to proceed with the dock.
Yeah. Let us,
Chairman, sir, I am but one here. Despite those who believe that I will destroy everything in this country, I've said this before, I am no environmentalist. You will not find me hugging up any tree in this country, but I understand extinction is forever. I understand that. And I want to preserve, especially through the enforcement in this country, the environment that needs to be protected. I cannot, in good conscience, vote for anything to do with that dock out there, out of this fund. That business case should have been done long time.
but Mr. McLean, the revenues that come to the country, some are diverted to the EPF and some are diverted to the operating bank account. So I don't see why you're objecting to revenue that is earmarked for environmental matters to be spent on environmental matters. You're saying it shouldn't come from the Environmental Protection Fund. It should come from general revenue. Well, revenue, otherwise not earmarked for the Environmental Protection Fund, is simply general revenue. But we would be utilizing the revenue in the Environmental Protection Fund for environmental matters.
Mr. Chairman, I understand what you're saying, but understand in 1987, our predecessors saw the need to collect certain monies to earmark it to ensure that the environment was protected when need be. That is my thing. If we earmark certain coercive revenues towards a specific thing, that's what it must be used for. We earmark certain revenues derived from the use of the roads and the importation of vehicles to the fixing of roads. That's what it should be for at all times. I am of the view that when we go outside Section 4 of that motion which set up this fund, and I read that disbursement from the fund may only be made in accordance with resolution made by the Finance Committee and under the authority of the Financial Secretary, Minister, for the purpose of defraying expenditure incurred in protecting and preserving the environment of the islands.
But Mr.
That's what it says.
But Mr. McLean, the whole purpose of an environmental impact assessment is to protect the environment. So you would perform the assessment. The assessment will highlight potential risk and mitigating factors that could be implemented. And the EIA does such a thing. So we are in keeping with the intentions and the requirements of the motion that the fund be utilized for protecting the environment.
Mr. Chairman, you know I question your intervention because you're a smart man, smarter than me. But I see you're missing something here, which was the question I asked. Does this mean the dock, we are paying to look at it and to protect the environment now after the EIA has come back that the state got destroy some of it, we're not going to do the dock. That's the intent of that, sir.
Mr. Chairman, if I can just try to sum this up so that those listening perhaps will be clear what it is that the government is seeking to do. Mr. Chairman, it wasn't in 1987, as the member from East End just said, it was in 97. On the 10th of December, 1997. The Finance Committee of the House, voted on a motion which, among other things, established an environmental protection fund. And it set out how the fund could be accessed and what ought to be done, how the revenue for the fund would be derived, and so forth. I won't go into all of that. But what it did in terms of proscribing the parameters of the fund and the use to which those monies could be put, it said the disbursements from the fund may only be made in accordance with the resolutions made by the Finance Committee and under the authority of the Financial Secretary, who then was essentially in the same role as the Minister of Finance now, for the purpose of defraying expenditure incurred in protecting and preserving the environment of the islands. Mr. Chairman, in addition to that, over the course of the last 6-7 years, approval to deal with finances outside the budget and even the development of the budget has been subject to approval by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. In the development of the current budget, it was put to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office that we had an environmental protection fund which now totals some $52 million, and that there were a significant number of areas which impacted the environment, which required attention, and that the government, the caucus, and the government, the cabinet, felt that we could utilize some funds from the EPF to address these areas, freeing up additional revenue for other purposes, as well as ensuring that we could meet the various requirements under the provisions of the Public Management and Finance Law with respect to ratios and so forth and so on. And so what has been developed are 4 specific areas which funding from the EPF could be used for. These have all been approved by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, who agree with the caucus, who agree with the cabinet, who agree with the government, that these are appropriate areas to which EPF funds can be applied. They are, Mr. Chairman, for the benefit of everyone listening, $2.5 million with respect to costs associated with the environment impact assessment for the cruise berthing facility, not for the construction of the cruise berthing facility, but for the environmental impact assessment. $1 million for the integrated solid waste management project. $180,000 with respect to the replacement of the Seakeeper vessel for marine patrols, and $1.5 million to be added to appropriation head FSC 13 to cover elements or to enable further conservation-related operational expenditure and conservation-related projects and initiatives. So that is what this Finance Committee is being asked to do. These are all environmental-related issues and areas, and the government has concluded that these are quite appropriate for use of EPF funding. And so, Mr. Chairman, what the committee is being asked for is to vote a total of $5,180,000 for those purposes. I hope that sets the record straight.
Thank you, Mr. Premier.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, on the 15th of May, 2015, your good self, sir, laid on the table of this honorable House the government proposed budget. In that budget, you have a responsibility to lay out the financial position of this country. I draw your attention, sir, to page 335 of the AP&E, wherein you laid out your reserves as a subheading. Thereunder, there is a subheading of Environmental Protection Fund. You propose to this honorable House and this country that you were this government was removing $4 million from that Environmental Protection Fund to be transferred to the general revenue. Today, the 17th day of July, we have before us 5.18 with the explanation that it's for the dock and for the garbage dump. And at no time during any discussion, as long as these discussions have been going on, did this government say anything about utilizing any monies from that environmental fund to utilize on the dock or the dump. Mr. Chairman, I want to see the approval. Why don't you all show us the approval then from the FCO that you can use it on the dock and the YNAM? Since that's what the Premier has said, that it's only fair, Mr. Chairman. I'm not saying anybody liars. It's only fair to displace the concerns. Well, what about the public? The public? I think, Mr. Chairman, the public is entitled to that. At the very least, is entitled to that. And, Mr. Chairman, you can go on with it. The public deserves to know where that environmental fund is being spent and how and if. Mr. Chairman, or they just try and get this cross. Mr. Chairman, if they make me finish. And since the Premier is saying that the FCO approved it, show it to the public.
Thank you, Mr. McLean.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to prolong and carry on the debate, but the member from East End is making a very valid point, and I say that again, and I'll repeat it, that when we examined the matters in Finance Committee, we did not know that the budget was not carrying the funds that we were voting on. It was not explained what it was said, and whether it was omission deliberately or whether it was just an omission. But the fact is, the country did not know, the members here voting did not know, maybe government knew, but certainly nobody on this side knew from what I can gather. Because the truth is, the government got to stop playing the way they play. They go to Ezra Nazin when they want to, and then come to me when they want to. Not right. But politics being what it is, we have to live with it. It is completely right what the member from East End is saying, because they were not in the budget. It has been explained. There are still matters to be explained in this. And I don't know that the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Financial Services, Minister responsible for the environment, has given us full and detailed information on all the reasons for the expenditure. But or whether in fact he even agrees. I know he moved the motion because what they have to do in cabinet, collective responsibility is collective responsibility. It is not right that the government did not inform us of the amount of money that was going to be removed from the environmental fund to do these things. Some of them I am wholeheartedly in support and appreciate. And although, as I said, when we done some things in the past, I didn't get any support. Be that as it may, I said I was not going to be an opposition such as I had, and I won't be. But I must again say that we cannot get out of the fact that the member from East End is correct.
Mr. Chairman, it is, maybe the government should consider not proceeding with this, and we go back and we review the whole expenditure, and we decide where it is we're going to find the money to fund these projects from elsewhere. It understand, all members of the Finance Committee will understand that this means a cut in expenditure across the board. Understand that. But I am not going to sit here as Premier and essentially be accused, as I have been by the member from East End, of telling untruths and somehow insinuating that somehow the government is trying to do something under the table. He will, like everybody else, will have to live with the consequences if the government does not find the expenditure, this proposed expenditure, from the EPF. I am happy to live with those consequences.
Mr. Chairman, I heard the Premier out there telling his colleagues that off mic, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I have been living with that consequence for a very long time now. I did not accuse the government of any skullduggery or anything else, or telling untruths. I said the country deserves, at the very least, this committee deserves to see where England has approved this utilization of the environmental fund for these matters. That's all I'm saying. That's fair.
No, you're absolutely right. They're not going to withdraw it. You know that. Come on, stop. They're not withdrawing it. They are committed. The government can't withdraw this because we've gone through a process already. And the government cannot withdraw this because the government is committed. And that's the bad part of this, is that they committed these funds and simply we didn't know what there was going to be. And I suspect it's because the government altogether was not on all fours. That's why.
Gentlemen, I propose that we take a 5-minute break. And we'll decide whether to withdraw or to vote on the motion.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know what you're breaking for because the government is not going to withdraw this. The government can't.
We will suspend proceedings for 5 minutes.